Hello, I'm Joanne Bjornson, Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Leidos, and Executive Sponsor of APIN, our Asian Pacific Islander Network Employee Resource Group. I want to welcome you to the SASE Professional Webinar Series hosted by Leidos. We commend all of you for joining today's webinar and taking the important step in investing in your professional growth. At Leidos, we are proud of our diverse population of talented professionals, including our strong Asian Pacific Islander community. It is only through the diverse perspectives of our employees that we are able to differentiate ourselves and build on our over 50 years of history in delivering critical solutions to our customers' most demanding challenges. By fostering a sense of belonging, welcoming all perspectives and contributions, and providing equal access to opportunities and resources for everyone, Leidos promotes an environment where inclusion is part of the fabric of our culture. Again, welcome, and we hope you enjoy today's session.
Scene 5, take 1, Mark.
Inclusion is
access to opportunities,
unique perspectives. Inclusion is
to a team.
Access to opportunities,
unique perspectives. Inclusion is
belonging
to a team.
Access to opportunities,
unique perspectives.
To achieve.
Inclusion is
belonging
to a team.
That respects our differences.
Access to opportunities,
and embracing our
unique perspectives.
To achieve.
So let's go from the top.
Inclusion is
belonging
to a team.
That respects our differences.
having equal access to opportunities,
and embracing our
unique perspectives.
To achieve.
greatness.
I like it.
Inclusion
Fuels innovation.
Inclusion is
all
all
of
of us.
Inclusion
Is Leidos.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This is our first webinar of the year, and I see, 85 people, and this is going to climb and probably hit over the hundreds. Fantastic turnout for our first webinar of the year. And of course, we've got a phenomenal speaker coming up. And so I want to give a shout out real quick to Leidos, our sponsor, for sponsoring this series, for making this possible. I'm your host. I'm Parag Matawar. I'm the Director of Professional Programs at SASE, and let's run through a little bit about what SASE does. So let me find my cursor, and there we go. So SASE Pro, what we're focused on is this problem. Asians are nearly 50% less likely to be promoted to middle management and executive positions relative to our Caucasian counterparts. So we have this Asian leadership gap. Our challenge for our community, especially in the STEM field, is not as much a challenge of getting in the door; it's getting up the ladder. And so this creates a tremendous opportunity of untapped potential for companies as well as the individuals. So usually we think about it from an individual standpoint, but really it's from a company standpoint as well. And so as we dug into this, we really wanted to figure out what's actually happening. So we researched about 50 executives, and really these 4 themes came out that limit our community. One is a lack of political and organizational savvy. A second is a cultural deference to authority. Third is ineffective communication and influencing skills. And last is aversion to risk-taking. Now, many of you in the audience, you may resonate with 1, 2, 3, 4, all, none of these, and that's okay. These are general themes, which allows us to figure out, okay, how do we want to tackle them? Overarching, though, we've got this challenge. The first one is awareness, general awareness that this gap, that the leadership gap and these 4 common factors even exist. Me communicating this to you today, of course, is part of overcoming that initial awareness gap. Number 2 is the leadership training. Often companies will tackle the challenge of the leadership gap as more a challenge of access. We've got this great leadership training. We just need to get more Asians through it. And while that's well-intentioned, that doesn't always produce the results that we're looking for. And so what we find is that providing leadership training with the cultural context coming from Asians for an Asian audience, it can be the exact same content and slides. It's really the context is critically important. And then lastly, let's face it, numerically, we are often not the top priority from an Asian, our Asian ERGs are often underfunded relative to our other peers. And some of that is due to numbers. Some of that is due to our own tendency to not raise our hand and say, hey, we'd like to have some resources here. And so there's multiple reasons here, but we are often not seen as the top priority, and we're a little bit lower on the totem pole. And so how we approach SASE Pro really feeds from these issues, these challenges. And so we bring together now actually close to 90 Asian ERGs and 200 Asian ERG leaders from these companies to co-develop the programs that we have. Signature programs being our National Convention and Women's Conference, and then year-round programs like this webinar series. So this is an ongoing free series. None of you paid a dime to get in, and if you did, then we need to figure out where that dime went. Featuring our training partners or interviews with executives, we do it roughly once a month. These recordings will be posted on our website, the same place that you went to register for this event. They will be posted. You'll get that will be announced likely by, it might happen as early as tomorrow, it might be Monday, and they'll be available there for a few months. And you can stay tuned with what's coming up by following us on LinkedIn. So, okay, enough of that. You're here for the main event. I'm so pleased to introduce Farzana Nayani. I was introduced to Farzana from someone who's here today, Tracy Allen from Northrop Grumman. She connected the two of us and said, hey, you guys got to talk. You're doing very, very similar things. Your heads are in the exact same spot on how you want to change the world. So Farzana and I connected. We had a phenomenal conversation, and that led to this webinar today, the idea for this webinar and so forth. Beyond that, the topic that we're going to be talking about is very much feeding off of a recent book that she's written. That was my I read that book over the winter break. Loved it. It crystallized into words for me ideas that I'd had, and I've been in this space for a few years now, ideas and thoughts that I'd had, but really crystallize it into concrete thoughts and actions. And so really super excited about today. So with that, let me stop talking and hand it over to you, Farzana. So I'll stop sharing and go ahead, Kelly.
Thank you for that introduction, Parag, and thank you, SASE, for having me. It's so wonderful to be here. Welcome, everyone. It's so great to be in this space with you today to talk to you about activating your ERG. And this is a conversation for you, for API leaders, if we have allies in the room. Part of this conversation is not only how to engage and activate the ERGs as members or as leaders, but also as friends and partners of Asian and Pacific Islander employee resource groups. So if you're here for any of that, you're in the right room, and it is wonderful to see some old friends here, familiar faces, and also new colleagues here in the room. Today, the format of our conversation is going to be a discussion. I will be sharing some slides that will engage us in our conversation and in our thought process. And at the end, Parag and I will be having a fireside chat. So this is a real conversation that we're going to have. This isn't any type of canned content. This has been specifically tailored for you, for this audience, for leaders like yourself in STEM and who are advocates for the API community. In addition to that, we will be using the chat, and as a part of our discussion today, it'll be also receiving questions from you. I saw that there's a question about my book. The book is called The Power of Employee Resource Groups, How People Create Authentic Change. And the reason why this title is so important, it's because it centers people. And I know that there's a lot of attention on metrics, on measurement, on the business case for DEI and for ERGs. And my take on all of this is how to serve people, how to support communities, how to also increase the leadership of people like yourselves. And we saw the problem set at hand with the API community. Unfortunately, this has been going on for quite some time. For those of you who are active in the API community, you've seen some of these numbers persist over time. And today we're going to start to crack the code on all of that. So as we have our discussion and begin, I want to start off with, before we begin and talking about me, I just want to honor the lands that we're all on. I'm currently on the indigenous lands of the Tongva people here in Los Angeles, where I live, and it's important to honor the original caretakers of the land and offer gratitude to the stewards of this land, wherever you are, and to acknowledge the punctuated history of the lands where we all are. You can look at the website called native-land.ca if you're curious about what land you're on, and if you'd like to also incorporate acknowledgements into your own ERG events. So a little bit about me, as was mentioned, my name is Farzana Nayani. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I've been active and involved in the DEI and ERG space for over 20 years. Did a lot around supporting small business, supplier diversity, and also DEI consulting. I currently serve as a consultant as part of a team for large organizations, startups, nonprofits, higher education institutions, and government agencies. I've written 2 books. Actually, the other one is called Raising Multiracial Children, and that one came out in 2020. And a little bit about me, in case you're wondering, my mother is from the Philippines, my father is from Pakistan, and we have roots in India. My grandmother's from India. So I think I span, a few different parts of the globe here. But what I want to focus in sharing that also is that each of you also represent different communities. And so let's use the chat. I want to hear from you about your ethnic background or what community you're a part of, or what's the name of your ERG. So whatever you identify with, let's warm up the chat and have you participate in a roll call. Yes, we see some fellow comrades here in the chat, and I love hearing the names of API ERGs. I'm always inspired by them because they're so creative and they're very inclusive. In addition to that, I lived in Hawaii for a few years to do graduate school. I went to the University of Hawaii at Manoa, so real connection to the Pacific Islander community as well. So keep that coming. I love seeing the backgrounds of everybody here, and I think that's important. And one thing that I want to acknowledge is that sometimes as you're working in the fields that you're in, it can be very data oriented, right, or process oriented. And discussions about identity can feel, a little bit to the side of your main work. And today in this conversation, what I'd like you to do is center your identity. I'd like you to pull it into the conversation. I'd like you to think about how this would work or not work for your community specifically, and then also for the larger API community, the Asian community. And what's important is also your region, right? What part of the country you're living in. Another thing I want to uplift that is very unique to the Asian community is the different generations. So we have people who are, I'm not just talking about age, baby boomer or Gen Z or millennial, but uniquely in our communities, we actually have people who are new immigrants, right? We have people who are second generation, and we have multi-generational families as well, who are here from back in the day when there's labor that was imported here. And why is that important? Well, I was just at a conference recently where there was, Asian topics. And I turned to the person next to me, and we were at the table together. And I was really inspired by this discussion. And I was like, what do you think? And the person next to me said, actually, this doesn't pertain to me. It has nothing to do with me. And these topics don't resonate. And I was in shock, pearls being clutched. Like, how can this be so powerful to me and not to you? Because she was of a different generation and experience than me. And I want to uplift that. And I'd like you to, that's the first takeaway from our conversation today, is that we are all very different. Our communities are very diverse. And part of our challenge is that, but that's also something we can celebrate. So I can see the roll call coming in here. Take a look and scroll through and see if there's anyone you'd like to connect as well, connect with. All right. So let's get to the heart of our discussion. And this is going to be where we spend our time today in thinking about how to activate your ERG. There are a number of different ways that can happen. And today we're going to unpack the different levels of how that can take place. Firstly, what may be present to you is the idea of creating community. Community development and fostering community is at the heart of employee resource groups. That might be why you joined. It could also be something that was a call to action and there was a movement and you couldn't stop it. And people were very involved in that. And, you know, I know that Lunar New Year's are around the corner. So happy Lunar New Year to everyone who celebrates. And after that, there's so many other occasions that we can acknowledge. Just coming together and being able to celebrate is such a huge thing. I remember I was visiting Mattel, which is nearby to where my office is in El Segundo. And there's so many stories of different celebrations that they had over there, from food to dance to celebration. And it really fostered community at that company. And I know many companies have that. I've visited Cisco and having the different parades and things related to different occasions. Now, how do you do that equitably though? This is my question to you. Despite and in spite and in light of all of our different communities. Okay. If I were live with you in person, I would say show of hands, who here feels that their ERG is covering all of the different communities, or do you think that perhaps there could be one or two that are missed? So task number one is to think about, the question on here is, how can members within the ERG learn from one another and also provide skills and expertise for ERG initiatives? The first answer to that is to think about surveying your membership and realizing how vast and diverse it could be. And what are some of the communities that are present, and maybe some that are not as present, and other communities that are overlooked. So really do that analysis. And that's something that you might feel that is always present. But I was leading a session up in the Bay Area for a group. And I asked them, okay, what generation are your participants? Where are they from? Where are they located in the country? And, 6 out of 7 of those ERGs didn't know. They didn't know, the ERG leaders. And it's not unheard of to wonder about that. However, the issue is when you create programming and you don't consider that. That's where there can be an issue. All right. So think about community, how you want to develop it. Also think about the norms, the cultural differences that could be in your communities that are different. And lastly, where I'd like to also highlight and uplift is that there could be people who are transracial adoptees or multiracial people, meaning belonging to more than one group. Why is this important? Because transracial adoptees may grow up in an environment that likely is not Asian, maybe is white, and then have different norms, right? And so when they come into Asian spaces, their experience of identity is very different. I was at the White House for the Asian American Pacific Islander Commission. I was invited a few times along with NAP. I know we have some NAP friends here. And I remember to this day that there was a person who stood up and said, we're talking about the API community, but we're not talking about everybody. What about transracial adoptees, right? And I remember leading a panel, and it was for the API community, and I looked at the names, and I had unconscious bias, right? I had bias. I looked and I was like, there's no one Asian on this panel. And then when the people came on the call to introduce themselves, there was a person there and he had a white name, but he was Asian. And so that was my fault, right? For assuming. I didn't know, but that discussion of identity needs to be more complex. And I am asking all of you to, after today, go back and examine who is a part of your population, okay? So that's community development. The second one here, the second item that I'd like to talk about is individual growth. And the question here is, how do ERGs create opportunities for personal development in addition to professional development, your own leadership skills, your own awareness of your identity? We just spent time talking about that. There's also mental health is a big issue across the board, but for everybody here. As we think about our communities that have been unfortunately attacked with the anti-Asian racism over time and ongoing bias, systemic oppression, this is why those numbers are the way they are. How are we represented in the general ranks, but not in leadership? Because of a couple of factors. It could be because of how we portray ourselves, how our leadership is, or it could be how we're perceived. Both things can be true at the same time. It is not one or the other. So the question is, how can ERGs create that opportunity for personal development? Are you communicating that to your members? Are you activating your ERG because you're sharing, hey, this is an individual, personal, professional growth opportunity? Or are you just making people, not making, but inviting people to attend and asking them to volunteer their time, right? Give. But what's in it for me, right? What's in it for the person? Are you communicating that? There's a fun example where Harley Davidson said, hey, you know what? Let's activate, this is the API ERG over there. They said, you know what, let's try to get new members. And so one of their activities that they did was bring a friend, bring a +1. And so they brought that person in, right? So what's that conversation going to be for that person though? How are you going to get them to come in? You've got to say that there's value. It's not just fun, but is there a growth opportunity? So you could have the method of having more members activated and engaged, but how are you showing the value? Another part of this that I want to share just in particular with ERG leaders is many people do not share that they're an ERG leader publicly. I'll give you an example. Raise of hands. You can just do this figuratively. Don't actually do this, but how many of you have your ERG leader role on your LinkedIn profile? Whenever I do this with a group, 90% of people don't have it on their LinkedIn profile. And most of those people say, you know what, I need to do that. Why is this important? I would need to tell you why. This is important not only for your individual growth, which is what we're talking about, but if you want to have more people come and work for your company and be drawn to your company, they need to see that there's an ERG there and that there's people like you who are active and involved, and there's a pipeline for that. You see how that works? So it's got to be a draw in. It's a way to attract people who are interested in that. And why is that important? Because studies show, there's a study that just came out that showed that people of color who are interviewing at positions are asking, are there DEI and ERG opportunities at this company? So they're making decisions based on that. Now, why is that important? Just for that person, but it's communicating to HR that these things are important. And that's important to show your value of the ERG and us as a community and our identities. Because if there isn't a place for us to be, then we don't have belonging. We don't feel at home. So this individual growth affects the community too. These are all interrelated, by the way. That's why it's important to share about what you're doing, how it benefits you, right? If a new person can get involved, how they can be involved. And that's another point that I'd like to stress. Anytime you have an event, always welcome new members. Always say, hey, is there anyone new here? Great, would like to invite you to share a bit about yourself, or welcome, and my name is da-da-da-da-da, and feel free to talk to me after. I've gone to ERG meetings where people haven't done that and the person is lost and they never come back because they feel like that meeting wasn't for them. It was some conversation that had been carrying on that, they weren't a part of. So think about how to connect to the individuals, not just this banner like, hey, we're doing this event, but what about the people? What about the actual individuals? That's the point of the book, right? How people create authentic change. How are you engaging people? The third point that I'd like to make has to do with amplifying underserved voices. And the questions that you can consider are, what does your ERG want to say or give voice to? What issues is it positioned to uplift? What cause are you behind? What point are you trying to make? And who is not at the table to do that, but you have the power to speak for? What is it? Is it, I don't know. I might get in trouble for saying this, but immigration. I know that there's a lot of issue around how we maintain visas and if we're going to continue to be hired, right? Or have that job. Understand. I actually was born in Canada, so I understand that whole process. And I've seen it play out over and over again where maybe there isn't support, maybe there isn't awareness, maybe there's, to be honest, some lack of equity around that. That's one idea. Another point could be around religion, right? Maybe you're part of an underserved religious community and you don't have a prayer room or you don't have the days acknowledged about your community. There is someone I know who used to work at Facebook, and she single-handedly spearheaded having wellness/prayer rooms on different campuses, starting with the Seattle campus. And I was so impressed when I saw her effort, because it didn't just affect her own religious community, it helped everybody. It became a space for everybody to have wellness, to have sanctity. So what we need to understand is when we amplify an underserved community or voice that isn't always heard, it really does help everybody. But you've got to position it so you understand that this is not just the savior mentality. I'm scooping up this problem. That's not the point. The point is empowerment. And maybe you can think about what the issues are that are not talked about. And let's talk about, in the Asian community, stuff we don't talk about. I'm talking about the stuff we don't talk about, okay? Those things are what matters. And only we can be the ones to raise it. No one knows because we don't talk about it, right? What about childcare? What about elder care? What about things that you need help with that other people may not realize is a part of your everyday? You could be taking care of actually 4 generations in the house. Let's be honest. I lived with my grandmothers, both of them growing up. That's my perspective. I've always had an elder, and then parents, and then me, and if there's someone younger, right? That's 4 generations. So is your leave, your parental leave, your care, your benefits, does that reflect that? I've seen some companies that have new bereavement leave that includes even people that aren't like a blood relative, because they understand that we're in blended families. So that's a way for it to be more inclusive and have belonging. I could go on, but we will have time for questions. Finally, the point that I know your business leaders are excited about and your executives are always attuned to: what's the impact on the organization? The question you can ask yourself is, what impact could ERGs have on your organization and the greater community? I talk about all of that in my book. I think, 100% of the chapters I've written have to do with creating impact. And notice that the word is impact. The word is impact because you have to define what success means to you. you have to define what it is that you want to contribute and what you want to do. So that is up to you. And as we close up this portion of our conversation, we will be turning to questions. We can go to the next slide. And I'm so excited to see some of the thoughts come in already. As you start to think of your questions, think about the points that I raised, just to recap, thinking about community, your individual personal development, supporting underserved voices, and then creating impact. Think about if you have any questions about that, or do you have any challenges that are a part of your day? So I'm going to turn it over to Parag, and now we're going to have our own discussion. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Farzana. Regarding your book, did you want to talk about that real quick before we do this? Oh, I'm sorry. That's a slide after this. My fault. So yeah, if you can go ahead and Kelly, stop sharing and we'll do this side by side. That works perfectly. First question. Can you talk about this current state of work and the challenges that API ERGs have faced since 2020? And you mentioned that, with the pandemic and Asian hate and so forth, a lot has changed in the world specific to our community and how we've been viewed, arguably since, 2001, right? 9/11 would have been the last major traumatic of that level. And so what have you seen in the landscape happen pre versus post, given today's events? Yeah.
Great question. And, my heart goes out to all the ERG leaders who have been bearing some of the brunt of having to navigate this. Since the beginning of 2020, I've spoken at Salesforce, PayPal, Northrop Grumman, a lot of companies that and what I like to see, first of all, is the commitment. The commitment is key. I think that has been unwavering. And not only is it from the executive leaders, but the ERG leaders, and the ERG leaders have done so well with partnering together to share what is on our minds. So that, I think, has been the positive outcome of some of the trauma that has been experienced. Given that, we saw, actually, this is a fun fact, I don't know if people know this, probably over 150 Asian ERGs were started during that period of time because of the anti-Asian racism that was faced.
Yeah.
And that's just from a group I know that supports ERGs. Now, the question at hand, though, is how are people being supported after all of that? Once these are formed, is there, ongoing support? Are there resources? Is there awareness? Another thing that I want to caution is defining ourselves as being created out of something terrible. I also want us to highlight the wonder, the beauty, the talent, or the joy that we have. And there's this art exhibit I went to in Kansas City at Arts KC. Shout out to folks in Kansas City. And they were talking about defining yourself as an Asian American again, right? Because we've been defined now, right, by the news as victims. Right. And so this whole art exhibit, this entire room, which gives me chills, it was very diverse, folks from South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, was about redefining who we are. So that's what's at hand next for our ERGs. Yeah,
I mean, it's a very good point for those ERGs that have just been created out of the current turmoil to ensure that this isn't a blip in time. This is a lasting effort in ensuring that the content isn't just purely localized. Obviously, we got to tackle what's going on, but it's got to be broader than that. Otherwise, it'll end up being temporary. So, yeah, no, great advice. Great advice. And so how would you recommend communicating the value of ERGs to individuals who may not see membership as being aligned to their career goals? I get this a lot. I mean, I talk to ERGs very frequently, and Asian ERGs in particular, and Asian professionals in STEM, granted, some of this is generalization, but it comes from somewhere, is often there's a what's in it, not just for me, but what's in it for my career. And ERG activities can be seen as just, oh, this is just social and feel good type stuff, which, our parents certainly didn't tell us was part of success, right? And so how do we so a lot of ERG leaders really struggle with communicating that value and ensuring that that ends up being part of their outreach efforts. What have you seen work?
Great question. There needs to be a balance where we see the value for all. And I think people know that it's effort. It does take time and initiative, but number one, it is a place of growth for leadership. And I call this the sandbox of opportunity. ERGs are where you can play in the sandbox and you can grow and you can take risks and you can learn how to present and speak in public or project manage with less risk, right? The other thing I have to say is ERGs are a tremendous network. I was coaching someone who worked at McDonald's and she said, look, I want to go into a different career. And I said, okay, who do you know? And she said, well, I'm part of the Black ERG and the women's ERG. I know 2 senior executive leaders there. And literally she had meetings with them within 2 weeks and then shifted her career. I saw her 6 months later and she did a complete shift. I can't tell you enough about how valuable that network is. It comes down to even things like having something approved. I was at a conference and there was a person who worked for a company and he couldn't get approval to attend we were talking about how he got to the conference and he said he didn't get approval from his individual manager, but he knew someone in the ERG that was more senior and got it all approved and then helped his manager get the approval. And that's why he was there. So I can't say enough about how much, what a treasure ERGs are. It's just a matter of your own creativity of how to leverage it.
Yeah, no, I definitely see. And, often ERG leaders themselves, we had this talk we have an ERG summit every 6 months or so. And one of our trainers, came in and gave a talk specifically about ERG leaders and their tendency to put everybody else in front of themselves and not take advantage of the opportunities inherent with being a leader of this community and the networking opportunities, as well as just, getting your, practicing and so forth. So you hit on a lot of fantastic points there. It's a shame that many of our ERG leaders are faced with challenges from a succession planning standpoint, because it should be the exact opposite. People should be knocking down the door to be able to represent the community in this way. So, what tips might you have for advocating in an organization as an API member or as an underrepresented group? And we've got this model minority myth, call it the elephant in the room, the moose on the table, whatever, pick one of those, and that absolutely, that's there. So how does that interact here? What have you seen? You're on mute, by the way, Farzana.
Yeah, does everyone know what the model minority myth is? It's about us being, the Asian community being positioned as like better than other minorities because we succeed and we work hard and keep our head down, and it's been generations of this. It does harm us because people think we're fine. Yep. And if you examine the workforce, people who identify as Asian, many of us are working hard. But we also need to advocate for what we need, and that can be difficult. So how do we advocate for an underrepresented group? You actually have to start to create what I call feedback loops, where you're asking and listening and offering, and it's got to be an invitation. It can't be just in response to a crisis. We're seeing a lot of that, right? Like, community's in trouble now, let's have a discussion. It should be ongoing. So I think that there needs to be constant dialogue. Definitely leverage your executive sponsors to help be champions and people who can support that. They give a lot of great advice. And in addition to that, so there's a difference between having a sponsor, a champion, and a mentor, right? Mm-hmm. A champion is someone you actually may not know is championing for you to go ahead and further your career. There could be someone who puts your name in the hat for a job and you didn't realize that they were championing you. The sponsor is someone who's helping you along, and a mentor is someone who you can confide in and get advice. So part of it is also getting advice from these types of individuals in your life to help advocate.
You touched on something that about the listening sessions that a lot of ERGs have had, coming out of the activity events of the past couple of years. And I know that's probably more relevant to a prior question, but you also mentioned that this shouldn't just be a one-time thing. So what have you seen work, or what would be your recommendation on that front? Is like, should there be just like listening sessions on some frequency, or does that evolve into something a little bit different from an event standpoint for ERGs?
I think data speaks, and everyone knows that. So how do you collect the stories? How do you collect the quotes? How do you collect the opportunity for those voices to be heard? So I've seen it. Some of the companies I mentioned do a really good job of having people come on the mic and share. And then they were intentional about inviting their business executives, not the executive sponsors, but the other executives in, so they could hear. I did a talk for Walmart. It was their moms group. And they did a fantastic job of telling the story of what it's like to juggle work and family, so much that it moved their executive to tears. And those people each pledged to bring 100 people in. So we had 300 or 400 people at one event. But that was because they told their story. So we tend to not like to share, and it's called saving face, where we don't want to necessarily culturally, right, like create shame around ourselves or others. And so part of it is, how do we do that delicately? Maybe there could be an anonymous feedback form where those stories could be shared. I like to also advise Asian ERGs to have some time before and after the formal meeting. And I found that people stay after, and then they kind of tell you a little bit after when they're more comfortable. So that's how you can get that vulnerability. Gotcha.
Yeah, I think, one of the comments you made before about, really getting to know individuals at, and their background story, it's, being in this work, I spent my career at Procter for 20 years and very active in the Asian ERG. And I don't think I ever really was intentional about that, really hearing individual stories and just kind of assuming, oh, okay, every Indian American most likely came here the same way I did, and just kind of made that assumption. And being in this role with SASE, I've met so many young kids who have such different stories from mine. And your point about just the diversity within the room is not just one of our ERGs is named 49 Voices for the 49 countries represented. I love that name. So it's not just about those 49 nations, but even beyond that, not just the generations, same generation, same everything, could be very, very different circumstances, and the beauty that exists within that. And so hearing you talking about, ways to ensure that there's a drumbeat of hearing that information, it's a fantastic tip. Thank you for that. So given that, great cultural and ethnic diversity that may exist at generations, and you mentioned multiracial adoptees as well, we've certainly seen that within our events over the past few years. Like, then how do you create unity? Because there's so much, if you point out all the differences, right, then all of a sudden it almost could have the opposite effect of, oh my gosh, well, why are we even in one group here? So how do you create that collectivism, that collective, community feel?
So executives and executive sponsors love when ERGs partner for events, because they get more bang for the buck and you can do more, you can draw in more people. Cross collaboration is key. It shows unity, it shows respect. There was one ERG that I heard from, and they did a handoff event. So between the API May Heritage Month and June Pride Month, they made sure to do one where there was a crossover. So they called it a handoff event, so that there was some seamlessness and support across the way. So there are a number of ways that you can do it if you're intentional. One of the ERGs I was working with, San Diego State University, by the way, colleges have have ERGs too. They did one where they had Black and Asian employees share what it's like, and they had both of their ERGs come. So it's really cool stuff to think about that, and a lot of solidarity building around communities.
Gotcha. And lastly, from the prepared questions, and thank you for tossing in for audience. Thank you for tossing in questions. We'll get to those in 1 second here. What should an API individual consider before stepping into an ERG or BRG leadership role? What advice would you give them?
I think a big one that comes to mind is take risks, get uncomfortable. Someone told me early on that when you're uncomfortable, it means that you're growing. And whether it be through negotiating or through taking on a role you feel like you're not ready for, that's actually the way that you grow. And if you hear any senior Asian executive story, usually they take a leap or they've done something outside of their zone of comfort because they got tapped for it or they were seen. That's the way they climb the ladder. And that's the way all of us should think is, hey, how can I, move outside my comfort zone, go a little further, push a little harder. And, selfishly, I'd like to see more of us in positions of power that are those roles so we can help shift the narrative and change the dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely correct. We talk about that in a lot of our programs about the need to, I know from women's studies as well, that there's been a lot of talk about, with a job description, women tend to have a tendency to ensure that they hit every single one of the items before they'll apply. And I think the same is true with the Asian audience as well. And so, yeah, if we are to be successful in the workplace, we've got to get comfortable with the things we don't know. And what better way to do that in the safe environment of an ERG leadership position as well. So, I love that. I had never made that tie, but that's a beautiful one. So I'm going to steal that and I'm going to viciously reapply that idea. I love that one. So thank you so much for that, Farzana. So pivoting to some audience questions, Uday Sheth, my SASE Pro executive advisor and personal friend, what do you feel is the role of the ERG around talent development and helping identify, develop, and sponsor high potential APIs to accelerate their growth?
Talent development. Can you repeat the first part of that?
Sure. What do you feel is the role of the ERG around talent development to identify, and having them be part of the process? Where have you seen this work? Is it something that you feel ERGs should be part of?
This question is interesting because the answer is it's already happening. So if this is not something that is conscious to people, it's happening unconsciously. I do coaching for executives, for CEOs and the C-suites and stuff, and they look to employee resource groups for talent. And if they don't do it directly, they have people who are looking in there. It's an easy place to look. Now, what does that mean though? It means that there are people who are shining and there are people who could shine. So I think part of the question is also, how do we get more people at the forefront to be seen, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to grow? And that is also a commitment we need to make. How do we uplift ourselves in totality? And there was a tech company I was talking with, and they had an offline conversation. I can't say their name, but they said, hey, Farzana, when we support these employee resource groups, we are interested in actually tracking and monitoring how people in an employment way rise in the ranks, because we want to see that these investments actually pay off. And companies are doing that. They have various tech dashboards and things that are happening. In case you're a part of them, there are metrics in there that monitor that stuff in a good way. So we want to be able to, take advantage of that and guide that conversation.
Wonderful.
I'm telling you all the real deal. I hope that's okay.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, those stories, of what's actually happening, we don't always hear those, right? Being on the front lines or being and whatnot, but certainly hearing it from, those executives, those senior high ups who are utilizing that information is great to hear, quite honestly. So yeah, from Ketki Patel, how do you balance both the beautiful cultural aspects through events, as well as have the difficult conversations to enable those, pieces you were mentioning before? How do you balance that? If you just start out having fun events, then it's kind of hard to introduce the tougher subject later on. And so you've got to kind of hit them. Like, what have you seen really work to hit both needs?
I'm going to ask Kelly to screen share the next slide because it'll answer this question.
Okay.
So the issue that we have a lot of the time is we focus on maybe just the events and not the other parts of the business. So Kelly, if you could just share the next slide, please. Part of the issue is there are mistakes that are made that are common. And this is one mistake where we say we only need to do one thing and not the other. There's a link here for resources. Before I forget, and I know some people need to drop off, so I wanted to uplift this. It's how to operate an ERG. I created some resources so people can take this and review it and look at some of the mistakes that are made. So go ahead and you can download that after today. So just want to share that. But as I'm talking, I was at a panel at eBay, and this debate broke out where one side of the panel, I won't say who was on the panel, it wasn't eBay leaders. They said the Asian community focuses too much on fun. The Asian community focuses too much on celebration, and we don't do enough. And then the other side said, we've got to make a better business case. We've got to be really strategic. And so I actually am in the middle of that. I think we need to have a combination of people who enjoy and celebrate, and all of us have a space for that, for our communities and who we are. And then we also need to be strategic. So I can't say enough about that. Thank you for sharing the screen there, Kelly, before we forget about that. Thank you.
Also from Ketski, I really like this question. Actually, Ketski, you chair an ERG. You and I need to talk to begin with. So I chair an ERG, and I'm remote with the company, and the company won't allow me to fly in either for events or how do I build the business case to fly for business travel related to ERG events? I see this a lot with ERGs, even with our conferences that are, leadership programming, and either individuals perceiving that they don't have the support, or legitimately not having the support of their business for training, and then sometimes even for hours. Sometimes it even has to do with how they're coded within, they've got to allocate their hours to specific projects or clients or whatnot like that. And so we have this major challenge of folks feeling like they can't participate in meaningful ERG activities without having a charge code or without having an account. And often different companies within the same industry treat it totally different. So how have you seen that transform? What's driven that conversation to help leadership change their view?
So some of the advocacy has to happen by the individual, either from their own supervisor or through their executive champion, right? That's one level. The other level, is it a policy issue across all ERGs? And if it's that, then, that's harder to change. That's understandable. Budgets are being clamped down on, especially now, and especially with in-person travel. I think the third thing is the movement around ERGs is happening, where we're seeing how important they are. And it sounds to me like the business case that needs to be made is not just with that individual, but the power of the employee research group, maybe over time, maybe organizations like SASE. What's the value of flying out to that conference in person? Right? Like, they've got to work on it over time. So I think that there's different levels this can be approached, and I encourage the person to look at your network and think about who can assist with this, because it can't be just you who is advocating.
Yeah. Actually, that you mentioned this about talking with other ERGs. We had a similar issue at Proctor. We ended up getting HR data because all the ERGs banded together and got enough clout to get access to specific individual level data, so that we could track our progress. And it is through banding that together. So so advice. So with that, I know we are coming close to time. Did you have another slide you needed to share?
Oh yeah, let's do so
regarding the book. And so
thank
forth.
you for that. Yeah. So this that bundle, great. So go ahead and we can stay in touch this way. This is a gift to SASE. So we arranged to have a discount for all of the webinar attendees today. You will get 30% off of the book, The Power of Employee Resource Groups, when you go to my publisher's link. So that's the publisher Barrett Kohler. That's not anywhere else. So please note this link, and you can share it with your friends. And there's an end date to it. I think it's February 8th. So 8, our lucky number 8. Just remember that. But yeah, I want everyone here to have a copy and to engage in the conversation more.
Fantastic. With that, let me steal that share real quick. So with that, I'd like to close. Thank you again so much, Farzana, for your time, for your commitment in this space, along with your team. Been fantastic to work with, and really enjoyed your comments and sharing your thoughts with us. Jessica, if you could toss up the poll real quick, folks, if you're still on, there are 2 questions in this poll. This is how we know how we're doing. So 2 very simple questions, answer the first one and then scroll down and answer the second one and hit send. So if you could do that real quick, that would be a great help for us. Lastly, more information, you can find us on the web at saseconnect.org. A lot for the collegiate portion of the organization, as well as with the pro side of the organization. Follow us on LinkedIn. We post all of our events, all of our professional events on LinkedIn. And if any of you would like to reach out to me and get involved with the network, just reach out to pro@saseconnect.org. And with that, we are right on time. Thank you so much. If any of you had any pressing questions that you'd like to still ask, if you want to hang on for a few minutes, we've got a few minutes left post the event. So with that, thank you so much, everyone.